What's up, mobile gamers? It's Dronzer Gigs back with another tier list video. I know a lot of you guys have been wondering where this is at. How come I haven't dropped one? And the answer is I just honestly haven't got around to it. This season has been really, really good. Super Season 2, the one we're on right now, is pretty much fantastic. There's so many new skins, so many events and things to make videos on that honestly I just haven't gotten around to it. But I wanted to make sure that we got one out for you guys before the next season starts, especially with how many new changes are going to be coming and how much is going to be going on with Super Season 3. I think it's really going to shake up the meta, especially in all the other tiers actually accept this one. I think this one's going to be pretty much stagnant unless we get a few different buffs here. And speaking of buffs, we're going to basically start it out with the K tier, right? This is the C tier or the Kelvin tier. And the reason I say that is he needs a lot, right, to be good and to actually be competitive and comparable to the rest of the Vanguard heroes. And then I would pretty much put him in A or high B. I think that he's got a lot of potential, but he has just a few things holding him back that make him not as usable as some of the other Vanguards. And right away, before any of you guys freak out, you're like, oh my God, he's so good. His damage is awesome. The snowballs are very easy to dodge, right? And you also have to factor in where I'm coming to you guys with this tier list, right? I've said this in all my tier list videos. This is a very bare bones, very basic tier list for the average player. And you're not really going to see, somebody picking up Kelvin and being like, I really like this guy, he's really cool. You'll probably see that, but they won't really use him to his fullest potential. And most people won't have a hard time countering him like they might have a hard time against some of the other heroes on this tier list. So this is very much so for the average player who picks up T3 and, maybe you've played for like a week and you're like, who's good? Who do I play? Who's worth putting my resources into? And Calvin's just not it, man. He's for a really good player, he can be really good, but you very rarely will find a Kelvin that you can't fight and combat very easily. He's just so easy to get around. The snowball is not very directional compared to any of these other heroes, even Fort, who has the most one directional shield. His shield's better than Kelvin's if you use the snowball as a shield. So it's not really a fair comparison. He does have that damage buff that he just recently got. But he's very vulnerable from pretty much every angle except straight on. And even if you have like a very slight advantage, like on the one control map, Elephant Estania, you can actually sit on the where the pillars and stuff are right before you come into the area. And if he's sitting there, you can still shoot over the snowball because if you're playing a tall hero, you can see over the snowball, and that pretty much makes him very, very bad in my opinion, especially as far as like who's going to be able to counter him. Most newer players or even players who are just kind of good in general, they're going to be able to counter Kelvin in a way that you can't really counter some of these other heroes. So that's my thoughts on why he's that low. Obviously, he does have a lot of glitches, right? His gun doesn't do a lot of damage. Sometimes the snowballs will miss, and then other times they'll roll over a bump that you can't even see on the map and go like into the air and off to the side. And it's so weird. They should either make it where the snowball, if you hit it straight, doesn't interact with terrain, or they should look at different areas of the map and see where his snowball is going to go off course. Because a lot of the times you'll be fighting a Kelvin and he'll throw a snowball at you and it'll just go right over your head for no reason. His snowman transformation for his second active, it doesn't push the cart. I'm not sure if it allows you to capture a point. I'll have to check on that. Let me know in the comments if you guys know. But it doesn't let you push the cart. So if you're playing Kelvin and you've got overtime and you're trying to win the round and you're on the cart, you turn into a snowman and they lose the overtime and your team's going to lose. And just for that alone, I think he needs to be underneath all the other tiers just because he has too much wrong with him um, compared to all the other heroes. We are going to change this row to like a green color just to differentiate, right? Kelvin's just he has a few bugs, right? He needs them to be fixed, right? We're gonna go over to the S tier now, which is Jabali. Now, I didn't have an OP tier because I don't think we need that for the Vanguards. Jabali's clear S tier. He's over all the other Vanguards. I know I didn't have him at the top before, but that was before the buffs and the nerf to Ruby and his second ultimate. Now he's pretty much the best Vanguard because of how much damage he can soak up. And on top of that, his second ultimate not only soaks up damage, but reflects it back at the enemy. So they essentially will kill themselves if they try to do damage to you. I know that Jabali, when he's fighting another Jabali and the Jabali uses a second ult and the other Jabali fires at it, it doesn't count. Not sure like why that is. I think it has something to do with the way the gun works. But he's really, really good. He soaks up damage better than anybody else. He has really good close range damage. And he's kind of the only Vanguard where you can just literally put up your shield right next to you and it doesn't move. It soaks up more damage than any of the other shields. It's the best shield by far. And the other reasons that I have the other two Vanguards in A tier, right, that you saw in the last tier list, those are gone. So you saw Ruby was above Jabali because of her stun. And I still think that Ruby is insanely good, but Jabali just has a little bit of edge because her shields move. And if you miss the stun, your second ability is really kind of worthless. It can be very good. That's why Ruby's an A tier. If you can stun someone and capitalize on them as a team. With comms, all of these heroes go up a tier. All these heroes are up a tier if you have comms. If you're able to tell your teammates to focus the Aletta or the Neon and you can stun them as a Ruby, you go, oh, I'm going to stun the Neon. You stun the Neon and like just a Gloria even shoots at her and she's dead. Almost a guaranteed kill on a stunned opponent. Honestly, unless you're the only person looking at that opponent and you're not very close, that's the only time I can really see the stun failing to get the kill. Her ultimate's pretty decent. It's not crazy, but it is pretty good at destroying flankers and some of the lower health damage dealers. And Ruby is very good for soaking up damage, but the shields move. That's the only thing keeping her from S tier. If you could lock the shields in place or like choose where they go, something like that, I think she'd be S tier as well. But because Jabali's shield goes with him everywhere and you have to kind of think ahead with Ruby, she becomes very hard to, or very easy to deal with, I should say. If you have a flanker that goes around the shields, then she's toast if she misses the stun in a lot of instances, unless like you got a cracked Ruby or your team is good or whatever. But Ruby's very, very good. I don't think any of the other heroes really have what she has. She just doesn't have enough to reach that S tier level unless you're a very good player or you have comms right. You can play any of these heroes at an A to S tier level. Maybe not Kelvin, right? Because literally the game's against you. There's so many areas of high ground and flanking and terrain that makes the snowball bounce. He has glitches where he can't move the payload. The game is essentially against Kelvin, and that's why I think he can't be played at that level. But Ruby, she's got everything going for her. She's pretty much perfect. She just doesn't have that very niche soakable damage shield that is always on her and the reflectability of the damage. She doesn't have any of that. And that's why she's an A. I still think she's absolutely incredible. And Fade is staying an A as well. He is a hardcore counter to Jabali and Ruby and pretty much all of the tanks on this list because of what he can do. And I think that a lot of people underestimate how good a Fade can be. He is a counter to Jabali. He really can turn the tide in terms of like if he rushes somebody and hits them against a wall and maybe one of your Glorias or Gatlins can take some damage onto whoever he's rushing, they're dead. He's the only one that can fully counter all the shields in the game. All the shields in the game. Jabali, he gets countered, whether it's his ultimate, whether it's his first or second ultimate, I should say, whether it's his regular shield, whether it's Fort's shield just goes right through it. If you have a Victor that is going to do a lot of damage, right? And he starts spinning his shotgun for his second active, it goes right through that as well. It stops it. So Fade has the counter to all these other Vanguards. His ultimate allows you to remove anybody from a point, and it counters the shields again. He has another counter, and it removes them from wherever you want. You can just take them, and you can just throw them away. If you have a flanker who's too close to your healer, you just take the ultimate, shoot it, and throw them away. You literally just yeet them off the map or into your team's firing lanes, all of that. And he is super, super good. Unfortunately, he just doesn't have the right shield to soak up damage the way Jabali does, just the same way Ruby is not able to be in S tier. Fade is not able to be in S tier because of the fact his shield is not as good as it could be, and his projectiles, they kind of bounce. They bounce better than Kelvin's, but they still have times where the terrain will interfere with where you're trying to shoot. So this next one, it's going to honestly surprise a lot of you guys. Ono is A tier. You can argue he's high B, but he is very last A tier. We'll just write Fort's right here, and then Ono's right there. A lot of you guys are probably like, what? That's crazy. How do you have these other Vanguards this high? And I think your answer, right, is going to be that these tiers are very easy to kind of move around. Your B tier can go to your A tier, can go to your C tier, or if you want, all of these tiers are pretty close by each other. And that's why I would say this is probably your complete tier list. You can argue this, you can argue this, you can argue all of them are here, you can argue all of them are down here. Pretty much they can be moved around wherever you want. And for me to be like, oh, Ruby's A tier and Ford is B tier, and you're like, oh my God, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. It's not that big of a difference. It's not that big of a deal. The only thing I would say is Ruby and Fade are solid A tier, top of A tier, not moving. And you could make an argument that B tier can move up to A tier if you just really like the hero, honestly. Ono is probably the one that can move around the most based on team comp. So if you have any of these other tanks, Ono immediately is A tier, right? So he's a very good tank. He just doesn't have the ability to soak up damage, which all of the other Vanguards have a better ability to do that. They all have a better ability to soak up damage, and Ono's projectiles are just kind of difficult to deal with. It's not necessarily the hardest thing to hit, but a lot of people complain they need to move a little faster, stuff like that. His shield did get a buff, right? So when you put a shield on somebody, it actually is difficult to break. So you can turn 1v1s, right? I always talk about healers and how good they are. Ono can kind of do the same thing. If you have a Jabali and he's about to lose to another Jabali, you can shield, and that little bit of health, it's like 4,000 or something like that, is enough to turn the tide even against a Gatlin. If you shield your teammate at the right time, it can win them the fight. And I think that's very much so an overlooked ability. And he also has an ultimate that pushes people off. So he can kind of go A or B. I think solid B tier is good for him. I think high B is pretty good. You can pretty much interchange all three of these guys. A tier's just not, it's not budging with the Ruby and the Fade. And Ono has a lot to offer, but he really falls into the back seat. If you're only running one Vanguard, don't run Ono. Do not run Ono. He's not good enough. You'd have to basically have a Neon right on him and hope that the other team doesn't run a Jabali, Ruby, Fade, right? Those top three Vanguards. If they run like a Victor, you can run Ono. If the enemy team is running a Victor or a Fort or a Kelvin, you can run Ono. If they're running an Ono as well, you can run an Ono. But he's really good if he has another tank acting as that damage absorber. And I think that that's really underlooked. A lot of people wanted him to be broken, and then he released, and a lot of people are saying he's super weak. I think he's kind of just average. He kind of fills that role that some of the other tanks don't fill, where he's more of a support tank and has decent damage, but he does not fill the Vanguard role enough for me to be like, okay, he's good as a Vanguard, as your solo Vanguard. He's not. So with a Vanguard, he's A. Without a Vanguard, he's C. So we're just going to put him in B as kind of like the middle ground. And then we'll talk about the other two, right? Victor is incredible, right? He's really good. Unfortunately, he does not have the ability to soak up damage compared to the other two. And the ultimate that he has is pretty much the same as Ruby's, except she can use it way more often. He has the stun, but it's connected to his ultimate, and it doesn't come fast enough. The stun is essential to Victor's kit, and I think if they were going to change it at all, they would go back to one dash and give him the stun on the dash, even if it's just for 1 to 2 seconds, and he'd instantly be A. I think that a really good Victor can be an A tier, but he kind of falls into that category of, well, if you already have a Vanguard, you should play Victor. If you don't have a Vanguard, don't play Victor. You know what I mean? He doesn't soak up enough damage, and he doesn't dish out enough damage from far ranges. He's going to be a very easy target unless he's close. And so if you look at the meta and who the heroes are that most people are using, Victor is basically not going to be able to do too much. He can kind of dash in, which is good, but if he doesn't have his ultimate and he uses up his shotgun spin, then I don't think that he can really do it. The only hero out of these three that I would say is better as a solo is actually the Fort. Now, Fort doesn't need a healer as much as some of the other Vanguards do because of the fact that he regenerates his shield and he has the fortification, I think is what it's called. I'm not sure what it's called, but it fortifies him and puts the armor around him, and he takes less damage. And it pretty much comes back at the same speed as Victor, but Fort has that long-range damage that Ono has if you're able to hit all 4 of his shots. And the reason I would say he's not fully established in A tier is because if you miss one shot, his damage fall off is very bad. If you hit 2 to 3 orbs, you're going to feel like a lackluster Fort. You're going to feel like you can't really do much compared to all these other Vanguards. And so I would say Fort is your top of B, bottom of A. And then if you want to move Ono up, you definitely can. And honestly, you can just move Victor up too as well. So feel free to let me know what you guys think as far as like where you want to move them. The solid picks, right? You got Jabali, Ruby, and Fade. Solid. They're not moving. Kelvin, he needs some bug fixes, some quality of life so he can move up to B. And then these 3 right here are just interchangeable. It really depends on the player. It depends on the team. They have too many factors involved for me to be like, oh, your average player is going to do A with Fort or B with Ono. He just doesn't have what it takes, neither of these 3 do, to move up a tier to B into A. Like I said, it's a small difference. It's not something that is really that big of a deal. But if you're like, you have to make a tier list, you have to put A, B, C, then I would say they're B. You know what I mean? Pretty much all of this is the same. The only one that really stands out is Jabali. You could say for the average player, it doesn't really matter who you pick, especially if you're in a casual setting. Pick whoever is fun to you. Honestly, a lot of people are like, who's the meta heroes? Who's super good? It doesn't matter. It just matters if you have fun. And if you think Kelvin is the best in the game, go for it. I don't think he is. I'm telling you, as the average player picks these heroes up, where they're going to be, they're going to love Jabali. They're going to love Ruby. These 3 heroes, I'm not really sure. Kelvin, he's the bottom of the pack. Your average player is going to get certain uses out of certain heroes. um, where Victor's not close, he's too close range. Ono needs a tank to use that soak up damage, and his firing rate's a little odd. And Fort the same. He has that firing rate. He has that one-dimensional shield that we talked about, where it only covers the front. And they're just all these three heroes are in that niche area where the average player, if they are good with them, you bump them up to A. If they're not so good with them, you keep them in B, and they're not very good. They're just kind of average. They're decent, but you have those three other picks that are better. So those are my thoughts as far as like where the Vanguards go, what I think. Feel free to comment below if you think my tier list is wrong. Obviously, you see a lot of tier lists from different YouTubers, and the Vanguard one's the one that I would say I mess up on the most. A lot of people would say your Vanguard one isn't very accurate. I'll agree with that, right? You saw my support tier list. I put Neon at the top, and everybody's like, oh my God, you're crazy. And then like 2 weeks later, she's the best healer in the game. And now she is the best healer in the game. It's not even a contest. So I definitely think that a lot of people freak out, but this is your general player tier list, your person that just picked up the game for like a week or two. This is what they're going to see. This is how they're going to feel. And if it's by who I like, I actually really like Ruby. I think she is my personal best Vanguard. I think I play even better as Ruby than I do as Jabali. So I want you guys to know I try to be unopinionated, right? This is supposed to be your very basic tier list for the basic player, the average player that doesn't have my opinions into consideration. There's just too much that these three heroes, right? They need to get too much right in order to be an A tier. I would say he's low, and then like top, and then Zero Calvin, man, he just needs that little bit of love to push him up. Jabali with his second ultimate is the best hero in the game. As far as Vanguards go, especially as far as soaking up damage. Close range, he's still very good. He's in the top 10 of close range damage dealers. So that's saying a lot. I really hope that they fix Kelvin and all the bugs that he has. And overall, I would say that T3 Arena has such good balance that you can pretty much throw this out. S tier is to stay, and then all the other ones you can kind of lump together with whoever you have fun with. T3 is so balanced that it doesn't really matter. Play whoever you have fun with, and if you're like, should I pick this hero, then look at this tier list and see. Obviously, ranked brings comms, it brings better players. So a ranked tier list is going to be a little bit different, probably pretty similar, but overall, you play who you're best at in ranked, and that's what I think kind of separates it from just pub games and stuff like that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I tried not to make it too long for you. I know it's probably sitting around like 26 minutes or something like that. But I wanted to make it a little bit shorter while also going over everybody in depth. So let me know what you think, where your heroes are, if you think I got one wrong. And we'll see you in the next one.